Hello there, and you are watching Forest and the Sea's YouTube channel. I am Ted, the bass player, your radio host for today, and today we're going to be going over an analysis of the bass line on the song Travel Song. Alright, so the reason I picked Travel Song for this little video is because it has a really funky and pretty fun bass line that I came up with just from jamming to the chords that the song was built upon. I'm going to be talking about specifically the verse chords and the verse bass line, since the chorus is slightly different. I'm going to have the bass line on screen. You're going to see the sheet music, and first thing you'll be able to tell is that it's incredibly repetitive. It's an ostinato, which is what a lot of bass lines in popular music are, a recurring segment of music over and over again. The song is in E minor, E pentatonic, minor pentatonic really, and the bass line just follows the notes of that scale. So the bass line, well, I'll play it on piano here, sounds like this. Those two measures are very similar to each other, but that's like the vamp that it repeats over. Now the chords for the song that you hear the guitars play are as follows: E minor 7, B minor 7, and A minor 7. And that's the gist of it. So the guitar part you hear sounds as follows. So we're going to figure out why this bass line works over all three chords in the songs, even though the three chords have different notes in them. And it's all going to be based on the function and chord extensions. So the first chord, E minor 7, is E, G, A, and D. It's the home chord for this song. So the bass line, up the octave, right there. Let's take a look at these notes and figure out why they work over the first chord. E, D, E, G. Well, take a look at our chord. We have an E as the root of the chord, D is the 7th, B is the 5th, and G is the 3rd. So those first three notes of the bass line, technically first four notes, first three different notes, are the root, 3rd, and 7th of the chord. And then it goes, so E, D, E, G, E, D, B, goes back to D. We have this A, which is the first note not part of the chord, and then G, E, which is the 3rd and root. So the first note we have that doesn't fit in the chord is an A. There's without the A, there's with the A. It's not the same chord, but it doesn't sound bad. So, a few reasons why. The simple reason is we're in the key of E minor pentatonic. So those are the notes that will work over soloing over the song or writing a melodic bass line over the song. Also, other notes will work based on the chord. Can we look at the chord? Of course we can. So we already established that E is the root, G is the 3rd, B is the 5th, and D is the 7th. So we can extend, we can build up chords in thirds. We can go further, like we already have it in thirds, but we can add more thirds on top. So root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. We can add a natural 9, which is an F sharp, but that's not the note in question here. It's the A, it's the 11th. So it's the 11th of that chord. So an E minor 11 chord sounds like this. It's kind of spicy, it's kind of a rich chord. That's a pretty luscious jazz voicing. So there's no 9, it's basically E minor 7 at 11. That sounds great. So even though A is not in an E minor 7 chord, it is in an E minor 11 chord, and quite frankly, in the context of this piece, it is an E minor 11 chord. It's just, you're not playing E minor 11, you're playing E minor 7, and the 11 is just naturally applied through the amazing laws of music. Awesome. So our bass line works over the first chord because all the notes of the bass line fall into the chord except for that A, but the A behaves as the 11th. Next note, or next chord, is B minor 7. Remember how I said we're in E minor pentatonic, but technically E minor? Here's an example of where and why you would call it E minor. In B minor 7, we have the notes B, D, F sharp, and A. So that F sharp is part of the natural E minor scale. So now we're going to play that chord and talk about the notes over the bass line again and figure out why does the exact same bass line that we use over E minor 7 work over B minor 7, because the two chords are pretty different. It's an interesting sound when you play both at the same time, but it's not too interesting. What I mean by that is an example of too interesting would be two chords that are very different played at the same time, such as... Now that was very interesting. So there are some similar notes between B minor 7 and E minor 7. So the first two notes are B and D in B minor 7, which was also the last two notes in E minor 7. So each chord has 4 notes in it, and 2 of the notes are the same. So between the two chords, there's only 6 different notes. The first note of the bass line, as we just said before, is E. It's not part of the chord, but it is the 11th of B minor 7. That's all the explanation you need. We already said that it worked over E minor 7 when we had the 11th, right? Once again, it's a jazz chord with that 11 on there. It's richer or spicier. That's usually the term that young jazz musicians are saying today is spicy a lot, but that's just a richer sound because we've added upper extensions. So let's go to the bass line. So E, D, well, E's the third of the chord. G. Alright, here's an odd one. G is the 13th, which is the furthest away interval possible. But it's also kind of the spiciest. It works, yeah, but it's kind of consonant. But it's appropriately consonant. It just gives it a little extra richness. Back to the root, 7, back to the 13, back to the 11. So we use both the 11th and the 13th of B minor 7 in the bass line, or the bass line over B minor 7 now accents the 11th and the 13th, and over the E minor 7 chord we accent the 11th of the chord. So far our E minor 7 chord is actually E minor 11, and our B minor 7 chord is actually B minor 13 without a 9th, but with an 11th. Next is A minor 7, which once again is similar to D minor 7. So D minor 7 has D, F, A, and C in it. And A minor 7 has A, C, E, and G. So, once again, the first two and last two relationship that we have between B and E happens again with A and D for these minor 7 chords. So, the chords are similar, meaning those are the two chords played together. It's not a jarring sound. In fact, it's quite nice. So let's take a look at the bass line again. The first note of the bass line, the E, is the 5th of the chord, a totally fine note. Now we go down to this D. So what does the D represent? Guess what? We're back on that 11th. Now we have our first instance of the 9th, so that's the 9 of the chord. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. It's a really typical sound in both jazz and a lot of popular music you hear on the radio. Usually songs of more of the R&B variety than of the rock variety, but minor 9s are hip. So 11th and 9th are the non-chord tones that get accented whenever that bass line is played over the A minor 7 chord. So nothing we've played is out of the ordinary. We didn't play any accidentals in the key. We didn't play any sharp 9s, flat 13s, or sharp 11s. We played natural 9s, natural 11s, and natural 13s. It was perfectly diatonic. So what would an example of like a flat 9 sound? That's when you get into crunchier stuff. Instead of B minor 7, if we played B dominant 7. So That's our home chord, E minor 7. And then a typical 5 chord would be B dominant 7. Instead of the minor 7 that we're using, it's just as fine to use the dominant 7 sound. So an example of when a flat 9 would be appropriate is over a dominant 7 chord. So right there. 1, major 3rd, 5th, dominant 7. Boom. That's jazz. But we didn't do anything that fancy. We just used natural 9s, natural 11s, and natural 13s. And that's why that bass line works over all 3 chords of the verse. So now, let's play it on the bass. Alright, now I have the bass. Well, we're going to be playing the bass line. And this bass is 100% passive. It has reverse wound humbucker pickups. I talked about it in a video where I just gushed about this bass. Single coil sound, but a humbucker. So, it sounds like this. Right there, you just heard me play it in 2 different ways. The first was using the lowest fret possible that I could. Or the first was actually up the neck. The second was open strings. So typically whenever playing bass in general, it's nice to stay as close to open strings as possible. Take advantage of your open strings, especially if you're playing fretless, because then you have the fact that those notes are in tune to check yourself. However, there are certain situations, technical situations mostly, where it makes more sense to play somewhere else and move the left hand more, so you have to move the right hand less. This bass line is usually at a pretty fast dynamic, and if I haven't played in a while, I usually have a hard time keeping up. But all it is just a left hand. It all takes place on the 5th frets and 7th frets, 1 note on the 3rd fret, and 1 open string. Also, I'm playing this as though I was playing a 4 string, because sometimes I do. So, on a 6 string, I could play this. I could do that. That wouldn't make much of a difference at all. For the sake of pretending like I have a 4 string, I'm going to play accordingly. Why I like to play it up here instead of up here is real simple. I like to articulate every note of this bass line. I could do hammer-ons, which would look like this, where not every single note is being played with my right hand, but hammer-ons and pull-offs, which are a totally viable technique, but I want this bass line articulated like this. I think it gives it a heavier attack to each note. Well, it does give it a heavier attack, and I think it kind of gives the song more motion. And this is a moving bass line. For that reason, I like to have more left-hand movement as opposed to less. That requires no shifts and just the index finger on the 2nd fret, middle finger on the 3rd fret, and an open string. But doing it up here, you have to move. So why do I like to move? The right hand. So first is the way I would typically play. And here's the way I do play it. It all comes down to string crossing in the right hand. I want to avoid it. Because every note's articulated, moving up and down the strings, it can get sloppy easily. So if I can limit how many strings I'm playing on, I'd rather move this left hand more, because, I mean, quite frankly, it's... I don't really care about left hand, like, moving. It's not that hard. I practice my major scales, I practice my minor scales, I do all these weird, like, modes that I practice, and especially because it has frets, it makes it easy. I'm playing upright bass sometimes, but I don't have, the luxury of frets, so left hand stuff is not an issue. It's right hand stuff. So that's why I like to play it that way. And then another thing is, let's talk about the rhythm of the bass line. It's basically the same thing over and over again with one slight difference. The last G, half the time it's 8th note, 4 and then that E ties over to the 1, and they play and So we have and a 2E and a 3E and a 4 and that and carries over to 1. And a 2E and a 3E and a 4 1 and a 2E and a 3E and a 4 and a 2E and a 3E and a 4 1. That was the rhythm. I was just playing those figures and I said, oh, I can kind of combine some of these. That's how I did it. So it was a total jam, and it happened to work over the 3 chords that were being played. We know why they are now, thanks to the harmonic analysis. So now, let's just listen to it. Let's just play along. That's the bassline travel song. It's the hardest song for me to play. It's the most fun song for me to play, and it's my favorite song on the album because it's funky. Take care, everyone.